it's much more difficult to be a leader in an area that you have no background in. It doesn't matter particularly to do with writing software. Everything's constantly moving, and one thing I know for sure is that you've just got to evolve and evolve and evolve. Go to that team and say, just build more. That's just not an option. They're interested in saying, I want to buy Google now. I want to buy Amazon now, and I want to sell it again now.
Hi everyone, it's Vasyl Soloshchuk from Insart, and this is our Fintech CTO Podcast. And we have a very interesting guest today. So before getting started, please click the subscribe button and like this video. Let's go. Hi everyone. So today we have Chris Wright, CTO of WealthKernel. Actually, let's start. And my very first question will be, Chris, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about your current role, what you do.
Sure. So thanks for having us on the podcast, first of all. So I'm Chris Wright. I'm the CTO at WealthKernel, and my role doesn't involve writing so much code these days. But in my early time at WealthKernel, I certainly spent a lot of time doing that. These days, it's all about enabling the wider team to build new features for our wealth management infrastructure.
So for how long are you in the current CTO role, actually?
So that's relatively recent. So it must be 3 months or so. I have been head of engineering for some time, and our previous CTO has moved on to other pastures. And so I've picked up those reins pretty recently.
Nice, nice. So actually on your LinkedIn profile, I have read, actually quote, I'm an experienced software engineer and architect with an ability to understand and communicate with both the technical and the commercial sides of the business. My question here is, so how do you see a CTO role actually? So is it more about the software engineering, more about architecture design, or more about management leadership, or building a bridge between technical and commercial side of the business?
Sure, it's a good question, and honestly, the strap line on the LinkedIn profile there is probably not super up to date. The short answer is, and as it is the answer to so many questions, it depends, and I think it depends a lot on where the business is in its life cycle. If you look at a startup with 3, 4, 5 people, CTO is likely to be hands-on writing code, right? They're going to be heavily involved. Doing everything. Well, everyone does a bit of everything in that scenario, right? Everyone wears many hats and does many jobs. As the company starts to grow, really starts to scale up, of course, it becomes less about writing code and much more about enabling others to deliver the functionality that you need as an organization. So it becomes more about recruiting the right people. It becomes about putting in place processes and making the developer experience good for the broader engineering team.
So your previous role was actually, as I understand, head of engineering for something like 6 years or so. And so what has changed actually? Becoming a CTO, what has changed? What the difference between these roles?
It's a good question. So it's a little bit further away from the hands-on day-to-day coding, and it involves more interaction with the other parts of the business, and in fact more interaction with the customers of ours. We're a B2B business, so it involves more interaction with particularly the engineers in our customers. Nice, that said, honestly, I was pretty heavily involved, with that stuff. The bigger factor, honestly, is the growth that we're seeing at the moment in terms of, the team size, in terms of the demand for our product. My role has changed, but also the company's changing continually. We're always looking to evolve and improve, and as we grow, we've got to change things. What worked for half a dozen people when I started doesn't really work for 15 people, and what works for 15 people doesn't really work for 40 people or 60. So it's about continually evolving.
Okay, so this is an evolution of the role.
I think so.
Okay,
yeah.
So before being a head and before being a CTO, which, as you also said, more like looks like more like a management and leadership roles. You also had a significant experience, as I understand, as a software engineer, software architect. And so basically my question is, so why did you decide, and choose to develop yourself into a management role? So what actually was like a trigger event for that?
I think there's a few factors at play. I mean, throughout my career, whilst I've certainly been writing a lot of code and architecting things. I've always been very interested in the business problems to be solved, and using software as a means to solve those problems, rather than in software as a means to an end in itself. Right. What's interesting is I never actually worked for the big IT vertical in any of my previous roles. I always worked for the business directly, like sitting on the desk with the with the business. And so in a lot of respects, I view the opportunity to lead or to manage or whatever as a way of getting more done. Basically, it's like the multiplier effect, right? If I can solve more business problems by making it possible for a wider team to work on a problem, then it gets more done.
Actually, what maybe are the other skill set that CTO may actually should or must have? What do you think from the technical perspective and also from the management perspective?
It's important, of course, that you've got to understand what's going on, when necessary with the nuts and bolts of writing code, of building stuff. It would be, I think, difficult to be a CTO with no technical background. But at the same time, it's about being able to take kind of the bigger picture view, looking from a bit higher up, having more context about what's going on, and with that context, helping the engineers, the DevOps team, everyone really to make better decisions about the code they're writing, or giving them the information they need to make those decisions.
Okay. So in what way your technical background helps you to be a good CTO, actually?
I think number one, it's possible, but I think it's much more difficult to be a leader in an area that you have no background in. It doesn't matter particularly to do with writing software, but it is important to empathize with the team that are working with you, right? If you don't understand what they're going through, or the battles they're facing in tracing some like really awkward bug in the system that they just and we've all been there, right? We've had to sit there and beat our head and what's going on? I really don't understand it. If you can't empathize or kind of draw on personal experience to understand what that's like, it makes it harder to mentor and to lead the team members there. And then the other thing I think with the technical background is, depending on the particular role, you should be providing leadership or direction in a technical sense, as well as in kind of the business sense. It's not just about saying we want to build this. It's about maybe looking at the horizon, scanning what things are coming up, what technical possibilities there are out there, and kind of giving direction there as well.
Definitely need to have a good technical background to understand, all the issues, all the problems. And as for the management skill set, probably needs also to be like a good manager, but who can actually set tasks, clear perspective, clear goals, and also control them. So what do you think?
Yeah, and I think that is clearly that's important. I think to a degree, it's about thinking about scaling things up, and it's a big challenge for any organization. I think scaling up, particularly for the number of people working in the business, and that's where maybe thinking about process, thinking about policy, I suppose is another word for it, starts to matter, and it's a scale of gray, right? You've got to be careful. You don't want to end up in an environment where everyone feels they're just totally wrapped up in red tape and too many things getting in the way. You want enough process to enable and enough documentation to be to enable teams to work and individuals to work autonomously where they can, right? You don't want to have a bottleneck around a few senior people in the company.
Let's talk about WealthKernel actually, and it is stated on the website that WealthKernel is powering digital investing.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris, can you please tell us a little bit more about what are the major APIs that you provide, and what are the major services or functionality that WealthKernel provides actually?
Yeah, so you can break our product up into a few blocks, if you like. So first, let me explain what it is that overall we're aiming to achieve. Really,
yes,
we want to facilitate other businesses that are offering wealth management services, really, to or potentially kind of brokerage services to retail customers. Well, it doesn't have to be retail customers; it could be other businesses even. If we took a particular example of that, it might be, okay, Vasyl decides one day, I want to invest some money for my future. I want to make some investment, and so you could go to one of our customers and say, please onboard me into the system. I want to invest $1,000, and I want to have that invested in a, let's say, very aggressive way or in a very conservative way, or what have you. That means we need to provide a few services for the businesses that we sell to. First of all, we need to enable the onboarding of Vasyl into our system, and so that means telling us information around your name, your address, and all those sort of things. And then we have to provide functionality to make sure you are who you say you are, because the arena we operate in is a very heavily regulated area. You can't just decide in the pub one night, you know what, I'm going to go out and make a robo-advisor and start writing some code and just start taking people's money. You end up in a lot of trouble pretty quickly if you do that. What we aim to do is if you have that idea and say, I want to write a robo-advisor, we want to make that really easy for you, because we can provide all the functionality around the onboarding the person, the KYC, and then taking making the channels to make the money appear in our system, tracking what the retail customer owns, and making it possible to invest that in various products, from mutual funds, ETFs, equities, and with time that range will expand as well. Broadly, it's about onboarding customers, one block. It's around facilitating the kind of the flow of cash in or out of the system, and it's about investing in one way or another in various assets that we support on our platform. The bit that's kind of hidden behind the scenes, it's sort of slightly iceberg-like in a way, in that we have the API, which is the surface, but that hides quite a lot of complexity that goes on behind the scenes. There's a lot of regulatory obligation and checks that we have to undertake, and we also have to do a lot of reporting downstream. We have to provide the pipes towards the markets that enable the trading or the brokerage to take place.
Yes, certainly. That's really interesting. So, and Chris, let's maybe set a little bit the perspective regarding the volume of that is handled actually by your platform. So, in terms of how many transactions, how many trades, and also
Sure.
assets under management. So, what can you tell us here?
Sure. So, what's quite interesting around what WealthKernel does is we're about trying to make these kind of services available to a broader audience. So historically, wealth management was it was something that you accessed maybe by visiting a person, like in real life, or maybe going to their office, or meeting them for a coffee somewhere, and they would talk you through all the possibilities, and you'd fill some paper in, and it would all work like that. The issue with that is that it's a very expensive service to provide. And so that was really only accessible to people with really a lot of money to get invested, right? You needed whatever, let's say £100,000 or even more in the more premium offerings to be able to be allowed in the door as a retail customer. What we can do by making a lot of things available electronically or online or however, is we can make our product available to people who want to invest, as little as, let's say, £10 or £100. We have, like, in relative terms, a lot more retail customers in the platform for a smaller level of assets under management compared to the traditional wealth offerings, which would be all about small numbers of customers with significant amounts of money to invest. In terms of, let me give you some numbers of kind of throughput. Mm-hmm. We see days where we've got hundreds of thousands of trades going through the platform, and so and that's kind of an ever increasing thing. So it's something really on our minds at the moment, is really increasing the capacity of the system to scale and to deal with those that throughput. Another kind of interesting thing, like, and again, this is a contrast between the slightly more modern world and the older world, is historically the wealth management world was very much about once a day kind of batch processes. When you're talking about scale, that's an interesting thing, because then not only have you got kind of quite a lot going through, but it's all going through kind of at once. Actually, in terms of customer experience, what something that we're really excited by is the possibility to start making things happen a little bit more continually. So a recent integration we've made is with another relatively young company called Clearbank, based in the UK, who they're offering banking as a service for us, but we're integrating. We hit their APIs, we get webhooks from them, and so forth. And that means that if someone transfers some money into our system, we can see straight away that the money's arrived. We can match it to their portfolio in our system, and it means that, whereas historically you would have been waiting till the end of the day to see a file downloaded from over SFTP or whatever, here are all the deposits made over the day, and you do your thing overnight to process them, and the customer wouldn't have seen that money hit our system until the day after, or worst case, if it was a weekend, they'd have to wait till Monday, right? In the modern world, they make the transfer, they can see it hit the bank, and we can see it straight away, and they can see, virtually as soon as they've hit the button, they can see the money in our system. And that's an interesting thing on the scaling front as well. So, because it actually, arguably, it makes it better for us, because it spreads the load out kind of more evenly over the day.
As I understand, your clients are neobanks, which is pretty clear, and also embedded finance clients. Mm-hmm. And actually, embedded finance, which is like a growing area, because in many different areas, platforms are integrating some fintech solutions, and we'll be interested to learn more about what kind of embedded finance clients do you have? Who are they? Maybe what types of clients you have in this area?
Sure. So I think embedded finance is, like you say, it's kind of the term of the moment in a way. It's quite a popular term. It's becoming a bit clearer with time what it does or doesn't mean. But broadly speaking, I think it means using the kind of APIs that we offer, or the kind of APIs that the modern banks might offer, to join together pieces that you might not necessarily have thought of, I guess. And so people can use our API, because people can use our APIs to buy an equity or a fund or whatever. It's in that arena, at least, it's almost like a question of where does your imagination limit you, really? People can do things like, let's say they've a tenant of ours might be like a neobank kind of setup, or an e-banking kind of setup, where you've got a card that you can use, and that's the app is kind of fairly tightly coupled with, or tightly aware of what's going on with that card. And so you see kind of stories about people doing things like buying a donut with an ETF they have in their portfolio. That's the sort of thing that people could make happen using our APIs, because they could make the call to our API to say, well, sell some of this ETF, and then they can see the proceeds from that, and then route it straight through to say, make the payment on the card.
Actually, I read an article, which is the name is "What are microservices and should you using them?" So it was by Charles Orton Jones, published April 20th, 2022, and it was a quote by you. Financial software provider WealthKernel is a strong advocate of microservices. And Chris Wright at CTO explains, in software terms, the decomposition of large systems into microservices means that they can be worked on and deployed independently. As the old saying goes, the easiest way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And this allows for increased team autonomy, faster release cycles, and improved isolation of faults. We also use microservices pretty heavily. So this is a nice topic to discuss, I think. And so taking that into account, so what is the current state of the art with the software architecture for WealthKernel platform, actually?
We're, as you might guess, using microservices. Our cloud provider is primarily Azure, and we're running a number of AKS clusters in Azure. So that's the Microsoft managed Kubernetes offering. We're in a pretty good place now, I'd say, in DevOps terms, in that if we want to deploy a new environment because someone wants to test some particular thing and they need an isolated environment to do that, it would be a lie to say it's literally a press of a button, but it's getting pretty close now to be able to deploy the Kubernetes cluster, the databases that are necessary behind the scenes, deploy all the the pods out onto the cluster and so on is getting pretty close now. The individual services running in the cluster are their C#, ASP.NET Core microservices, talking to each other over REST APIs, and talking through a service mesh, to kind of capture some of the benefits you can get out of abstracting some of those problems away from all the individual microservices. You can kind of have that cross-cutting functionality once rather than having to kind of build everything every time. What are the kind of key points have we got? An interesting point about how we work is that we use event sourcing to quite a degree, which is it's an approach to storing data that focuses rather on than focusing on state, focuses on events happening in the system and statements of fact about what's happened in the real world, I guess, and that lends itself very nicely to event-driven systems as well.
Okay, so when talking about the software architecture, I like to realize the Conway's law, and this law actually states that organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. So basically speaking, it states like, the software architecture reflects the team structure you have, and team structure reflects the software architecture you have. So, so will you agree with that or not? How is it? So do you have the similar situation in your team or not? So what can you tell us about this?
I certainly think there's some truth in it, for sure. The way we're structured at the moment is we have 3 independent engineering teams. But as I kind of previously mentioned, like, we're undergoing kind of quite a lot of growth at the moment. And so I think everything's constantly moving. And one thing I know for sure is that you've just got to evolve and evolve and evolve, because being kind of holding on too tightly to whatever particular structure you've got at the moment is probably going to be a mistake, unless nothing else is changing, I suppose. It's working well and nothing else is changing, fair enough. But in practice, for us at the moment at least, things are changing. We're growing, we're building new new products and onboarding more and more customers. Whilst Conway's Law, I'm certain there's some truth in that, and I think it microservices kind of fits in with that idea as well. It kind of like the whole idea is then you can have a team can own some number of microservices and they can work independently from another team. And ideally, we don't want to end up in a world where no one in the engineering organization can work without impacting other people, and that's one of the things that microservices gives you. And so I suppose in a way that is a reflection of what we want as an organization, right? We want to be able to have teams working independently, and microservices gives us that. So maybe that's like a corroboration of Conway's Law.
Okay. And so, how big is the current team, and what are the more specific roles you have in that teams?
So as a whole, WealthKernel is now around 60 people. Around a third of that is on the engineering side, and the majority of that is engineers building stuff, breaking down real world problems into things small enough to be built, and then building them, testing them, deploying them. We're big advocates of automation where it can be done. I would rather invest more time in building up automated testing than having humans there testing things, right? Because then that test's valuable for some time and it doesn't need a person to go through the motions every single time. Other than that, we have some project management and kind of BA sort of project office, if you want to call it that, people who are helping coordinate things. We work in a relatively complex domain, I would think, and with a lot of constraints from the regulatory side and the legal side. So there is a lot to be done in terms of understanding what the rules are, what it means in terms of what can be built and so on. So they really help out there. And then we've got a DevOps team and a relatively young IT in the sense of supporting IT for the business team as well. Again, as we've grown, we've found like no, we really need someone to own that independently from the people who are building the product. We need to support the wider team, the compliance team, the legal team, the operations team, with the tools that they need to do their day-to-day jobs.
So based on your experience, so can you add something more about the actual software development process? So how to organize, so what are the best practices that actually you implement?
In a way, the piece that I mentioned before with microservices, decomposition, I think is really fundamental. When you're faced with some business problem to be solved that is like enormous, daunting, where do you start with it? A really important part, and in my mind, I think the most important part, is how do you take that problem and break it down into smaller problems that are tractable, small enough that we can solve them, small enough that something can be built. Really, really important, because otherwise you're just going to be floundering. That's a really fundamental piece, and that has to start with really understanding what is it that we're saying is done in the context of the problem we're looking to solve. Let's shave that down. Let's make it as small as we can. We're big advocates of building an MVP and evolving it with time, because by building something you learn something, and that then will inform your next steps. Above and beyond that, by building that MVP and getting that used all the way to production, ideally, it's kind of it's a great feeling as a human to say, look, we've had something that's an aim here and we've delivered it, and that just helps everyone, I think, as a team, as individuals, to kind of have that feeling that things are being delivered, that we've ticked something off. It's a really nice feeling just to kind of tick problems off or drag them across on the Kanban board or whatever it is you want to be doing, right?
Yeah, certainly. So I really like the, like iterations, like small iterations, because you can iterate fast and deliver faster and actually get the feedback from the users, from the market, from the clients. Also, so talking about the microservices, so again, from the same article, so Chris reveals that WealthKernel production platform consists of 51 microservices, but adds that this number grows every time we incorporate new functionality. And we expect to have 70 microservices by the end of the year. So does it mean that with adding more microservices, you need to scale your current software engineering team?
It's a good question. I mean, we are scaling for sure, and I think inevitably, as you're adding more and more functionality, you're probably going to need to scale your engineering team. I suppose you can imagine a world where you build something and it's just working and doesn't need that much interaction going forward. But typically, there will be some costs associated with each incremental piece of functionality for the long term. But the short answer is yes, we're scaling our team. We're looking to hire. We are hiring.
So what's the strategy behind that? Like
the strategy behind the hiring, or
behind scaling the team. So you need to add more functionality, more microservices, but maybe, do you really need to extend the your current team? So maybe you don't need to scale it, or maybe you have some strategy here. So if you can explain in more details.
Sure. So the current team, they're super busy. We've got no shortage of things we want to do. We've got a lot of ambition, and so one thing I know we can't do is just go to that team and say just build more. That's just not an option for us.
Okay.
And I can't imagine many engineering teams are sat around like not doing much. So we're the starting point has to be we need to operate in a way that allows us to have more hands writing code and working together. As I mentioned previously, kind of one of the benefits of the microservice world is it makes, or if you're doing it well, it should be making the boundaries between different bits of domain functionality very, very clear. And when you've got those clear boundaries, that means that people can work on one part of the system safe in the knowledge they're not going to be adversely impacting some piece that's working well as far as we're concerned, right? There are a few approaches that that we can take. Like, let's say that we've got 3 teams now, and we think we want to have 4 teams soon. One way you could do it, I'm not saying this is a good idea, in fact I think it's a bad idea, would be to say, okay, now let's just recruit this new team off to the side. We can say, here's your problem, go away and fix it. The problem then is that how do they learn about the kind of the culture of working we have? How do they learn about the ways of working we have? It would be very isolating for that new team to come in that way. So the other alternatives are to kind of shuffle the teams up a little bit, bring people in or around. The other way is to kind of overload an existing team, like bring more people into the team until it's at such a size it kind of like it sort of splits out like cells multiplying, right? So you can say if we've got these little cells working on things, we can kind of bring more responsibility into the scope of a team and bring more resource to that team, more people working into that team, until the point it's like we get to the point now this is a size where actually it really makes sense. We can now split these out, and that could be split according to any number of bits of logic. But then now you've broken out your platform now into 4 teams rather than the 3 that were there before.
So does it mean like the speed of scaling your team depends on how fast you can onboard new team members into your team, and how effectively you can do this?
In terms of talking about scaling for like the amount of work that's getting done, then hiring hiring / onboarding are clearly a fundamental part. In that hiring is clearly essential because you want to be hiring the right people. And we've always taken the view that we would rather take a little bit longer and make sure we and really hire really good people, and I think we've done a good job of that. Once you've hired someone, onboarding is critical, and to be honest with you, I think it's something that we're working on actually, and looking to make better, because what worked when we were a relatively small engineering team doesn't work, but doesn't work when as you grow, because as a smaller team, everyone's kind of aware of everything that's going on. Communication happens much more easily by osmosis. When you start to get a little bit bigger, number one, you can afford to invest more in that onboarding process because it's getting used more regularly. In the very early days, we might hire someone and then not hire another person for another 6 months, by which time any onboarding documentation you've built is no longer relevant.
Correct.
When you've got more of a pipeline going, then clearly it makes much more sense to invest more heavily in that experience. So we've now got a dedicated HR team now who are doing a lot of work on the recruiting side, but also who are looking, and this is not just for the engineering team, but looking at improving that and formalizing that onboarding process for the whole of WealthKernel. Obviously, there are some parts of onboarding that are more specific to the IT side in particular, and that's another area that we've taken some really good, nice steps on. And we, for example, an idea of the sort of thing we can do is when someone comes on board, we can ask them to integrate against our APIs, and that's great in a couple of ways. Number one, it gives them an idea of what the product is out there, and our API is our product in a sense. So great, go and have a look at it. Look at the documentation, and so number one, they can learn about the product that we are selling, and number two, they can provide feedback on that product and make it better. So it's that's something we're really happy with as one of the steps of our onboarding.
Back to the microservices topic, kind of several scenarios how systems are evolving. The one is you develop a monolith system from scratch, and then at some point of time you're starting to decompose this to microservices. But the other way can be, develop the whole software architecture using microservices approach in the first place. What is your strategy? What do you prefer to do? And also in terms of return on investment for these strategies?
One thing to be very aware of with microservices is that there is some, in a sense, like fixed cost kind of overhead with that to get to that world where you're deploying all these individual microservices out with your CI/CD pipeline, and you're kind of managing those many processes that are out there and running. That costs something, and that's what you're alluding to, I guess, is like when you're starting from day one, that's quite a big cost. And so there's a couple of ways you can go about it. One way is to go like out and out monolith, just like I'm just writing a one big process here, database behind the scenes, and it does its thing. And that takes away a lot of that fixed cost, of course. I think what's interesting is a sort of a middle ground, which is to say we're just going to deploy a single process, because that takes away a lot of the complexity early in the early days in terms of the deployment, the management of all the individual services. But maybe write that monolith in a very structured way where you're still trying to maintain boundaries between the different domain pieces of your product, which means that when you're getting towards a scale where you're saying actually there could be some real value for us in breaking out into microservices, hopefully You've not ended up with everything stuck together in a big ball of mud, and it's relatively easy to then actually pull out the individual pieces.
Mm-hmm.
As ever, the whole thing, it depends. Like, depending on your particular problem that you're looking to solve, where you think you're going to be in 6 months. Maybe monoliths better, maybe microservices are better. If you're looking to build something that's super crazy low latency, probably bouncing calls between microservices and whatever, probably not the right fit. All of these problems, you've got to look at what the problems are in front of you, read about stuff, read about the possibilities, read about the pros and the cons of the different approaches, and make a decision on the back of what you've learned.
The other point here is also what could be the re-engineering strategy at this point of time when you need to maybe decompose your system into microservices. Some companies, they choose to do this decomposition work and let's say like re-architect and re-engineer in their current system, their current architecture. The other companies, they choose to rebuild everything from scratch, maybe reusing something, but mostly rebuilding everything. How to choose which strategy is better? And what is your experience here?
My personal feeling on this is the avenue of saying I'm going to rebuild everything from scratch, whilst it feels appealing, often ends up in trouble because number one, it's easy to underestimate how much embodied knowledge there is in the old system, right? And if you're often in those scenarios, the people who originally worked on the the legacy monoliths aren't available anymore. They've moved on to other roles or to other companies or who knows. You're going to have a steep learning curve, I think, rediscovering all that embodied knowledge. My view is the better approach is to chip away at the edges in a way, like identify some piece within the monolith that I can carve that off, put it behind, even initially, put it behind an interface within the monolith. Okay, now my next step is I can break that piece out. Chipping away, it comes back to that idea of identifying, decomposing the big problem. So in a way, the idea of rebuilding the whole thing, that's not decomposing the problem at all, right? That's saying we've got a massive problem, we're going to take it over here and rebuild it. By decomposing the problem, which is, okay, we want to get from this monolith approach to a microservices approach for whatever reason, who knows what the reason might be behind the scenes.
Okay.
How can I break that problem down? Let me move a little piece of it out. And then that enables you to kind of be continually delivering, learning the problems as you go. And it's kind of like doing a jigsaw puzzle, right? As you take each little piece away, well, it's like a jigsaw in reverse. It's undoing the jigsaw. The more pieces you've taken away, the easier it gets to break the remaining pieces down because you've got a smaller code base to work on, less to understand, less that you might adversely impact by making that deployment and so on.
Actually, before doing this, I mean, like decomposing the system. So what should be done before that? I mean, like maybe if you can provide like, some action plan, like maybe top several items, action items that should be done before starting decomposing your system.
Sure, I guess the beginning point has to be understand what the system's doing. Like, right, this monolith we've got here, let's understand what we're doing and make sure that there are, I would say, sufficient tests in place to mean that, well, two things. Those tests can serve two purposes. One is to mean any changes we're making to the monolith, we feel comfortable that we're able to test those ideally with automated testing. We can test that the changes we're making aren't breaking the existing functionality that we've now got to understand. Secondly, those tests are very convenient when you come to say, I want to break off a piece of functionality. I can take that set of tests that we've identified and written if necessary, if they weren't already there. We can take those tests and use the same tests in the microservice that we've carved off from the monolith.
Chris, What do you think are the obstacles that can prevent to scale your software, the software platform?
I guess one obstacle is like poorly defined contracts for what pieces of software are doing. Because if people aren't really confident in saying, I know exactly what the contract is for some piece of software, inadvertently break that piece of functionality, or you might be using it in a way that it wasn't intended, and so that would be one thing I think is really important, is be very clear what it is that any piece of software does or doesn't do. I think poorly, and this kind of goes back to the contract thing really, but poorly defined boundaries between different parts of your system, and what I mean by that is not that the contracts are defined at the boundaries, but poorly chosen boundaries might be a better way of putting it. That if you've brought something into a bounded context that doesn't really belong there, then it's going to make life difficult when you want to change certain behaviors or use that same piece of functionality in another way. So let's say you've defined some piece of functionality around placing an order, and as you first built it, only one particular service is using that, and actually something's leaked into the handling of the order that means that it only works for buying bananas. And now, okay, we wanted to build some new functionality to buy pineapples, and I don't know, there's some functionality in placing the order that assumes that you can peel this fruit. Well, you can't do that with pineapples. It only worked with bananas. If the boundary was nicely defined in the first place or chosen in the first place, probably it shouldn't matter if you're peeling a banana, if it's a banana or a pineapple. And if those boundaries are chosen carefully, you can bring in your pineapple functionality and reuse that orders service, let's say, to cope with that other fruit.
So let's talk a bit about the future. So what kind of scenario do you see for the WealthKernel team and the platform?
We've got like I said, we've got a big long list of things we're really interested in. One big area for us would be expansion into Europe. At the moment, we're more UK centric, and we're regulated in the UK. Since Brexit, that means in order to expand into Europe, we now need to be authorized in Europe as well, and that's something we're investing heavily in. We're moving towards Europe pretty rapidly. The other main pieces that we're really excited in the reasonably near term are around intraday equity trading. So, as I mentioned before, wealth management is historically a world of once a day happenings. People are doing things by batch, and it's about people investing their money for the long term. And honestly, for a lot of people, that's probably the right thing. But there's been an explosion in recent times of the sort of the free trading apps, right? That the sort of the Robin Hoods, the free trades of this world, the Revoluts. They allow people to come along and, rather than saying, I'm interested in buying this mutual fund and I'm going to hold that for the long term, they're interested in saying, I want to buy Google now. I want to buy Amazon now, and I want to sell it again now. And that's a really significant piece of infrastructure we're building right now. The ability to place intraday trades for US equities initially, and then we'll be expanding further beyond that into other markets. We're interested in expanding our offering in terms of the wrappers that we offer. So I don't know how well this translates to the US, but we support at the moment various tax beneficial wrappers around our offering. So in the UK, if you want to buy some shares or whatever, you can buy them inside what's called an ISA. It's a government sort of supported wrapper. That means you don't pay tax on the income generated inside that wrapper. And it's a really fundamental part of of wealth management, because of course, if you don't have to pay tax, you wouldn't want to. And we're expanding out into the pension space. Whilst at the moment we've got more of a focus on the UK side, we'll be looking to support wrappers, elsewhere as well, on the European side too. So that's another big area of interest for us.
My final question, what do you think will be like 2-3 major challenges for the whole fintech industry, let's say during the next couple of years, maybe up to 5 years? So what about these 2-3 major challenges, maybe from the technical perspective, maybe from the business perspective, ecosystem?
That's a big question. That's a good question. I mean, one challenge is always to look after the customers. I think that there's a constant drive to kind of make things cheaper and to kind of bring on customers by making things cheaper, and we've seen that in the US, for example, with the payment for order flow. I think people have made available equity trading, but they've made it free. But in a sense, someone's paying somewhere, right? And I think that's an area that the regulators are going to be looking into more closely, for sure.
Okay.
From a technical perspective, I mean, scale is always a challenge. Just like scale for the flow of traffic and so on. A common theme, and this is going to be a challenge, is kind of flexibility of people moving their business from one place to another. And historically, that's been something that's very difficult to be, is difficult for customers to achieve. So things are changing, I think, but historically, as a consumer, it's been really difficult to come along and say, I want to move my pension from here to here, or I want to take all my data from here and put it over here. That I think is going to be a challenge, kind of sharing the data around in a way.
Chris, thank you very much. So it was great talking with you. So this was my final question. So thank you for sharing all your thoughts, your expertise, and thank you.
You're welcome.
We're done.
It was fun. Nice to speak to you.